From Ed Smith Stadium in Sarasota, Florida, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and Danielle Allentuck. Danielle, we are baking in the sun here in Florida. I feel like we picked this location last year, and it wasn't quite as sun-drenched as it is this year. This year, we're getting the full brunt of the sun, and it's not behind the clouds.
No, it is definitely way warmer than last year. Got off the plane last week, battled through a snowstorm to get here, and it was like 88 degrees. So yeah. I think Florida skipped spring and went straight to summer, but not complaining at all.
No, I mean, it's that or be back in Baltimore. Sorry for everybody who's watching back in Maryland. I'll be joining you later today because I'm coming home for a little bit. But we have gotten quite a lot to watch, to listen to witness here at Orioles spring training. Games haven't started yet. They don't start until Saturday, but we're going to talk about what we've seen, especially from some of the new guys here in Orioles camp. And we also heard from the Orioles owner, David Rubenstein. We'll talk about what he had to say specifically about the payroll. But Danielle, let's start with the biggest name to enter camp and the guy who was drawn by far the most media attention of anybody who is new on this roster, and that's Tomoyuki Sugano.
Yeah, he hasn't even thrown a bullpen yet, and there is a lot of Japanese media who came over from Tokyo specifically to cover Sugano and watch his every move. Probably about a dozen of them, I would say.
At least.
Multiple different outlets, and, you know, Japan, they love their baseball. They're definitely going to be traveling around with Sugano all season, you know, tracking his every move. Yeah,
and it's obviously not as much attention as somebody like Roki Sasaki would be drawing out in Arizona with the Dodgers, but I think it underscores just how legendary of a career he had in Japan for the MPB before he came over here. I mean, this guy won their most valuable player award multiple times. And I know a lot of people, when they saw that signing, especially looked at his age and they thought, all right, he's 35. How much left does he have left to contribute? This is a guy who has had a legendary career for a long time, who has been able to adapt as he's gotten older. I mean, he used to throw 95 plus, closer to 100 miles an hour. He doesn't do that anymore, now in the lower 90s. But he's a smart pitcher. He's a savvy pitcher. And I'm excited to see when he throws his first bullpen session, which he's expected to do today. I'm excited to see him get to work with Adley Rutschman, get to work with Gary Sanchez, and get to talk to the pitching coaches, because that was one of the biggest draws of him coming to Baltimore, was he gets to work with a staff that led by Drew French that knows what they're doing.
And I think part of the attention on him is his age. You know, people are so curious, why did he pick 35 to come over to the U.S.? You know, he had options a couple years ago. He may have even been able to be posted earlier in his career. But people are so curious. You know, he's had all this success in Japan. He's had a legendary career there. If he retired there, still would be a legend in their eyes. But, you know, coming over to the U.S. and trying, you know, Major League Baseball and seeing how it works, I think a lot of people are, could he be Rookie of the Year? You know, is he that talented? And we'll start to see that today when he throws his first bullpen.
Yeah, I mean, I give him a lot of credit because he could ride off into the sunset with all of the numbers, all the incredible accolades that he has racked up over in Japan. But he wanted to challenge himself. I mean, he had this opportunity to come here 5 years ago when he was posted, didn't get the deal that he wanted, goes back to Japan, signs about a $40 million deal. And then at this point in his career, you know, he could easily call it quits. He could easily, you know, play out the string for a few more years. But he figured now is the only time I'm going to get the rest of my career to try to pitch in the United States. He had always wanted to do it. And now he gets to play against, you know, some of the best hitters in the world and see if his game does translate. And I think it's a fascinating gamble on the Orioles side. It's a fascinating gamble on Sugano's side. And it's just such an interesting dynamic because you have this 35-year-old rookie who is also one of the savviest pitchers on the roster.
Yeah. You forget that he's a rookie. Because, you know, in most senses, he is not. He's just, you know, new to Major League Baseball. But we were talking earlier, it's really funny because his locker is right next to Charlie Morton's and Zach Eflin and Andrew Kittredge, kind of the other veterans. And, you know, he's kind of one of the young guys in that group. But it's just interesting, you know, this clubhouse versus earlier years, there are a lot of older veterans here, and Sugano is one of those in a way.
I love what Charlie Morton had to say about Sugano, too. Charlie Morton, by the way, you know, one of the other Orioles that was added this offseason on a one-year deal. He has been a delightful conversation.
Oh, just wonderful.
Wonderful. Really smart guy, really insightful guy, 41 years old. He's done it all. He's seen it all. He's won World Series championships. And he's a guy that sees the game in a much different way than he did 5 or 10 years ago. And when he was talking about Tomoyuki Sugano, he said, you know, that's just the great thing about baseball is that, and he meant it. He wasn't just saying platitudes. He said,
we got a philosophy lesson from him, basically.
These are two guys from different sides of the world that can come together, and they have a translator between them, but I'm sure that they will learn to adapt to each other and learn a lot about each other. And I think it's just a cool dynamic to add to this team, because it's not something that we have seen a whole lot. This team didn't invest in the international market in Latin America for so long. We're finally starting to see those guys come up that were international signees under Kobe Perez.
Yeah.
Samuel Basayo should be on his way soon. But this is another market in the Asian market that the Orioles haven't dipped their toe into in a long, long time.
Yeah, and then this is something that they want to start doing now. They kind of feel like they've figured out Latin America a little bit. They've got their academy down there. Kobe Perez is doing a tremendous job. We'll probably see the first of his international signings make its debut this year, whether Samuel Basayo, one of the relievers who are on the 40-man now, that will start coming. But, the Asian market is something that they're really trying to build up now. And it's a market that they really lacked in for a long time. They had Albert Suarez last year, who a lot of people maybe don't think of as a signing from Asia, but it was because he had been playing in Korea and they had sent their scouts out to watch him. But, Sugano was a really good test of, is this a market they want to dip in more? And I do a lot of times think that how he does this year will determine how the Orioles want to invest in that area in the future.
Yeah. Let's talk about this rotation, what he could contribute. Mm-hmm. I'm also fascinated to see what Zach Eflin is going to look like in his first full season with the Orioles, because he is sandwiched between Andrew Kittredge, who's veteran reliever that the Orioles signed this offseason, and Charlie Morton. Mm-hmm. And every time you talk to Zach Eflin, I mean, we got a really good first impression from him last year when he joined this team from the Rays. And it just seems like he has already fit in very well. And for a guy who's, he's 30 years old and one of the older guys on the team at just 30 years old, which is scary for me, especially because I am a tricentenarian starting later this year. I think that is, he's in an interesting spot because he kind of bridges the gap between some of the older guys like Morton and some of the younger guys. And he's living in the house. Yeah. You're going to have a story on it later this spring. I did a video last year about all the young guys that were living together. Back then, Kyle Stowers was in that house with Adley, Jordan Westberg, Gunnar Henderson, Colton Cowser. Kyle Stowers is gone. They've added, though, Zach Eflin, who's got his connection with Ryan Mountcastle. They went to the same high school together. They knew each other in high school. And now Zach Eflin is fitting in with this team after, less than a full year.
Yeah. What cracks me up about Zach Eflin is when Adley told me that Zach was going to be in the house with them, specifically sharing the guest house of Adley. I looked at Adley and said, "Oh, that's great. You have a babysitter this year." And that's kind of a lot of ways what it feels like, even though he is friends with them, obviously. But you've got, 21-year-old and 30-year-old with 4 kids. You know, Zach Eflin's wife literally last week gave birth to a baby boy. So
fourth kid.
Yes, fourth kid, all under 3.5, I believe.
It's wild. 3
girls and now a boy. So Zach, went from running a daycare all winter, with his 3 girls running around, and now his little boy, and now he is essentially running an adult daycare at the house. So
I mean, it's
a funny dynamic.
Yeah. But it is crazy too, because these guys still feel so young. A lot of them are. I mean, Gunnar Henderson's 23 years old. Jordan Westberg's 25, Adley Rutschman's 27, turned 27 this year. So, but at the same time, they have so much experience already. Gunnar Henderson is entering, his 3rd full big league season, his 4th season overall in big league baseball. Same with Adley Rutschman. It's a group that has been through a lot together, and they've taken a lot of the lessons. I mean, Andy Koska of the Baltimore Banner wrote about earlier on where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months, by the way, the Baltimore Banner, about Adley Rutschman dealing with the winless postseason last year, with the second half struggles that he had. And it seems like he very much took that loss to heart. He very much understood that what happened in the second half of the season can't continue, and that he is a much better player than he showed in the second half of last season. And the kind of determination, the kind of fire that he's brought to camp so far, he's still the goofy, funny Adley Rutschman that we know. But at the same time, this team feels, and led by Adley Rutschman, feels very, very motivated to get over the hump this year.
Yeah, I would say that there's kind of, you could always say that the guys are mature for their age. Now they just feel like mature baseball players to me. The way that Hyde talks about them, they don't talk about Gunnar and Adley anymore like they're the young guys.
Right.
They talk about them like they're the leaders on his team, and that like it's on them. And I think that Gunnar and Adley in particular really recognize that, okay, this is our team for real now. If something's going to happen, it's on us to make sure it does. Yeah. And I've really seen that flip into two of those guys and the way that the team talks about them so far this spring.
Yeah, and especially the way Colton Cowser's season ended, you know, he took that to heart as well. He took that very personally, and ultimately this team could have, you know, signed any number of veterans that they wanted, and they brought in a lot of experienced voices after losing Corbin Burns and Anthony Santander, losing that veteran leadership.
And James McCann.
As well.
Very underrated leader in that clubhouse.
Yeah, they brought in a couple guys that they think can be leaders, like Tyler O'Neill. They brought in Charlie Morton. They brought in Andrew Kittredge. They feel like they've, you know, tried to replace the void of the leadership there. But at the same time, the leadership still has to come from within. You know, the best players on this team are still the guys that they drafted. When they go out there and play this season, and hopefully when they play in October, you're still going to see all the same guys in that lineup that struggled against the Royals last year. Adley Rutschman, Colton Cowser, Gunnar Henderson, all those guys had their struggles against the Royals. They're still going to be in that lineup. And they have to, there's no amount of veteran leadership you can provide from the outside that is going to be able to, you know, fix what went wrong last offseason. It's the guys that have to fix internally what went wrong.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, leadership does only go so far.
Sure.
You know, at the end of the day, it is on the individual baseball player to mature and realize what went wrong and how could I fix it. And I think versus in 23, they were like, oh, we just had a bad series, but, you know, wasn't our best. This year, it feels like after getting swept again in 24 in the playoffs, it feels like that mindset has shifted, you know, of like, no, it wasn't just a bad series. There was a bad second half, and we have to make changes to not have it happen again.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's well put. It wasn't just the two games. You know, the two games were, you know, a symptom of what had been simmering for a team that was 500 in the second half, that really underperformed down the stretch. That was the kind of team that we saw in the second half.
Yeah.
It was definitely a long-term problem. This wasn't just two bad games. So how this team is able to bounce back from that, I think is going to be really fascinating. I think it's a motivated group. I think it's a driven group.
Yeah.
And I think that we're already starting to see that. But ultimately, some of the veterans that they brought in, whether it be Tyler O'Neill, Charlie Morton, Tomoyuki Sugano, they can provide as much leadership as they can. But ultimately, the story of their Orioles career will be written based on how they perform on the field. And it's still yet to be determined. I mean, there are still question marks. Morton's 41. Sugano is entering a new league that he's never pitched in before. You know, Andrew Kittredge is 34, 35. These guys are, you know, certainly have question marks, but at the same time, the Orioles have signed a bunch of these guys to one-year deals. They feel like they can, you know, if one guy doesn't hit, maybe the other two will.
Yeah. And the thing about Morton is when he signed with the Orioles in December, I believe it was, I got so many texts from Braves people that I knew. Just being like, you are going to love him. The clubhouse is going to love him. He's just that guy. And he feels like, to me, what like Kyle Gibson and Jordan Lyles were in past years, where, you know, he's not going to be your ace by any means. And I think we all know that. But he's going to go out there, he's going to pitch probably 150 innings, if not more. And he's going to rally this clubhouse and leave an impact for years to come, like Kyle Gibson did in particular. So I think, you know, they didn't go out and get that ace, but they got out and got a guy who maybe can teach these young guys something and help them into the future.
Yeah. When you said by any means, I thought of by any John Means, because John Means is officially no longer an Oriole, signed a deal with the Cleveland Guardians. So he has gone. Talk about another veteran leader that this team is losing in John Means. But they are hoping, I mean, Means, Bradish, Wells, all those guys go down at the start of last season. The Orioles are at least hoping that, sure, Charlie Morton's not going to be an ace. He's not going to start game one of a playoff series. Tomoyuki Sugano, even if everything goes right, it would be hard to see him start game one of a playoff series. But
game three, maybe.
Yeah. But at least you have guys who can soak up innings for 162 games. That was something this team desperately needed last year. Takes a lot of pressure off the bullpen, takes a lot of pressure off guys like Rodriguez and Eflin. So hopefully they have enough guys out there that can at least get you through the season. And if that guy comes, if the ace comes later this spring, if the ace is Grayson Rodriguez, if the ace comes during the season, that's something that they can address later. And I don't think Mike Elias, I said it last show, but I don't think Mike Elias feels like they absolutely have their backs against the wall and they need to get this guy right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot will depend on how the season goes. I mean, I think a lot will also depend on how Grayson looks. You know, he hasn't played a full major league season ever. He's had injuries the past couple of years that have impacted him. So I think if Grayson's what they think he can be their ace. Yeah. If he's not, they can go out at the trade deadline and get somebody like they did with Zach Eflin last year, who was a great pickup for them. So they definitely have options, and they definitely have, you know, even with Chase McDermott, one of their prospects, going down with a mild lat strain. They still have plenty of pitchers to start the season
Yeah.
with right now.
Yeah, I mean, look at how good Albert Suarez was
Mhm.
last year, bouncing back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen. He's not projected to make this rotation right now. That's a great depth guy.
Cade Povich, I thought, looked great at the end of last season. He's looked good in his bullpen so far. He's another guy who can make it.
Yeah.
Brandon Young, who hasn't debuted yet, but was their minor league player of the year. He's an option. So they definitely have the depth to start the season right now.
Yeah. And as they saw last year, you need way more than 5 starting pitchers to get through a season. All right, let's talk about David Rubenstein, because this was the first time that we got to talk to him in a media scrum. You know, he was introduced as the Orioles' new owner last opening day in kind of a hurried fashion, because everything was happening around that time in Baltimore and in general and with the Orioles. So we got to finally kind of pick his brain on where this team stands financially and whether he believes that this team has done enough to improve and get to the point where they can be a World Series winner, and what this team has planned for the future. So let's hear a little bit from David Rubenstein yesterday when he was meeting with the media, and specifically talking about the payroll when he was asked if this team can ever get to a payroll that is close to 200
million. How high would you allow
million.
the payroll to go? Would you allow it to go to 200 million, for example?
I don't have a financial limit. The team is in very good financial shape. We don't have debt problems. We don't have financial challenges or anything like that. We want to put the best team on the field we can, and we don't have a constraint by saying there's a certain amount of money we've spent. Excuse me. So we can get the best team we can get. We will try to do that, and if it costs more money, we'll do it. But we don't have any particular financial constraints. Baseball has shown over the years that generally spending now doesn't necessarily produce championships. So championships are won by team spirit, by having real good camaraderie, and by having good players. And so it's a combination of things. If spending more money was a guarantee of winning a World Series, then we'd be happy to spend more money. It's no guarantee. You want to have a team that works together well, and it's a team not just for 1 year, but it's a team that's going to get along for quite some time. So I don't think we have a view that there's any financial constraints that we're operating under. We have a fair amount of money, and we're in pretty good financial shape, but we therefore spent money in the off season, and we got some pretty good players, and we're very happy with the team we already had, but we've added to it.
Danielle, can you ever imagine getting to the point in your life where you have no financial limit? Wouldn't that be nice?
Not in this industry.
Wouldn't that be nice? I mean, that's maybe how I feel on a Friday night after I've had a few drinks and start throwing money around. But that is just, he's a billionaire. That is David Rubenstein, and it's fascinating to hear him say that he doesn't have a financial limit, because this team did increase its spending a whole lot this year. Yes. I mean, they spent about $50 million. They went from about $100 million to about $150 million. They're 15th in Major League Baseball in spending, and Rubenstein was quick to remind us just how large that jump was in terms of payroll. But at the same time, they're not in the top 10.
Nope.
They're not near 200 million. They're not even close to the Dodgers at the top of baseball. Do you feel like you've seen positive signs, though, at least, that they are willing to spend more?
Yeah, I mean, they were 27th in payroll on opening day last year, and right now they're projected to be 15th. So that is a really big leap. And I think when you think of new ownership, you see a couple of different ways that they operate. You see, the Mets and Steve Cohen, who spent all that money, and then they lost it all, basically. Ended up trading, half of those big contracts away because they just weren't panning out.
Yeah.
And then you see, like, the Orioles, who were bought in, I believe, 2019, and they slowly built up. This team's in a different situation where your young stars are here right now. You have them under a contract for a couple more years, so you should take advantage of this window. So I think they did okay job this winter. I think that they added the pieces they had to. I don't think they necessarily added pieces that make them that much better.
Sure. Yeah, I think they at least replaced, in a lot of ways, the guys that they lost.
Yes.
They haven't necessarily gotten the ace to replace Corbin Burns, but they signed a couple pitchers who could give you at least his innings output, make up for that. They signed Tyler O'Neill to replace Anthony Santander, maybe a slight step back, but you also added Ramon Laureano and Dylan Carlson, so maybe that outfield depth is a little bit better than it was.
And a healthy Heston Kjerstad this year.
Absolutely, and they're hoping he takes a step forward. So they definitely, I think, made improvements. To see them even be, middle of the pack in spending is definitely a positive sign. But at the same time, his comments, you heard him say, spending money doesn't guarantee you win championships. Sure, that's correct. You brought up the Mets, and I agree. You know, just having the highest payroll doesn't mean you walk to the World Series.
But the Dodgers,
you know, at the same time, I think not spending money guarantees that you won't win the World Series.
Yeah.
You know, you can make the playoffs with a low payroll. We saw that last year with the Orioles that were 27th to start the year in payroll. But we haven't seen a team finish outside the top 10 in payroll and win the World Series since the 2017 Astros. That's a good comparison for this team because Mike Elias was the assistant GM on that team.
Yeah.
That team also went into the year without an ace, and they traded for Justin Verlander, went on to win the World Series. So maybe that's a model that Mike Elias is following for this year. But it is incredibly hard to win it all. You know, it's not if you don't have a top 10 payroll in baseball, you can very much still win your division. You can make the playoffs. You can make a playoff run. Very, very, very rare is the team that is not near the top of the league in spending and wins it all.
Yeah. And then the conundrum that I'm having with all of this is Mike Elias says, you know, it's nice when you have an ace, but you can't get it every year. And
Right.
then you have Rubenstein saying, no, we don't have a financial limit.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, well, if you don't have a financial limit, couldn't you just try to outspend somebody else and get that ace?
Right.
So there's a little bit of a disconnect between the two of them there.
And that ace was in your building last year.
Mhm.
Seemed to like his time here in Corbin Burns. I wonder if there ever was really a price point that the Orioles could have reached to keep him out of Arizona. There were a lot of non-financial reasons he wanted to go to Arizona. You know, his family's there. He made it clear he wanted to be out west. You know, that was the Orioles were fighting an uphill battle there.
But there were other aces out there.
There
Other
absolutely
top
were.
starters that they could have gone after.
Blake Snell was out there. He signed with the Dodgers. You know, there were plenty of guys that they could get, and they ultimately didn't. So whether Mike Elias is saving his bullets for extensions, whether he is just didn't think anybody was worth that kind of money, it's hard to say. You know, and it's just it's good to hear that they don't have a financial limit and that they could ultimately spend a certain amount, you know, whatever amount of money they want to get whoever they want, but they have to actually do it. And we haven't quite seen that yet.
And on extension, since you brought that up, you know, Rubenstein did have lunch yesterday with Adley Rushman and Gunnar Henderson. Called it a social lunch.
Yeah, he quickly walked that back. He's like, I had lunch with them. It was a social lunch. We didn't talk business.
No business. He just wanted to know about their background, as he told us multiple times. You know, Rubenstein did talk about, you know, possibility of extensions. He said, you know, I obviously know what the situation is. We have nothing right now. But he was very careful to Andy when he had his one-on-one to point out that, you know, not every extension works out. I mean, look at Team Strasburg and the Nationals, but you have a lot of other cases where extensions are great for the organization and the player. You know, just that long-term security can take a whole mental load off of everybody.
Yeah.
And, you know, these are your homegrown stars. So I think the second that I see, like, this ownership is different from past ownership, to me will be, are they actually making a committed effort to sign players to long-term deals, whether it's the players that they have now or players that they're trying to bring in?
Yeah, and I said earlier in the offseason, I think this offseason would be a major win even if they didn't bring back Corbin Burns, even if they didn't sign an external free agent to a $100 million contract, if they just extend one of the guys that they have, Adley, Gunnar, somebody else. Gunnar seems nearly impossible because he's represented by Scott Boras and he's 23.
And so is Westberg.
And so is Jordan Westberg. That's the other tough part about this.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys are represented by Scott Boras. He doesn't like to do his extensions. But when he was when David Rubenstein was talking to Andy Koska of the Baltimore Banner in an exclusive interview yesterday, and you can read the whole article on our site, but the quote that you referenced, Danielle, quote, "That's the conundrum you always face. If you get a pitcher who's 30 years old and he wants an 8-year contract, how many pitchers at pitching at 38 are that good? There are some. So that's the issue. The way baseball operates, as you know, you get these long-term deals. If a player gets injured in the first year and you can't play again, what do? The Nationals signed a great player. They had a great pitcher a number of years ago. He got injured right after signing, Steven Strasburg. And so it's a problem," end quote. Anthony Rendon was also signed that offseason to a very similar 7-year, $245 million contract. Did not work out for the team that signed him.
How many games has he played?
Right.
Can we count them on one hand?
Exactly. But there are also teams that have signed a lot of guys to these like 10-year deals. Think of Xander Bogaerts with the Padres. Think of Trey Turner with the Phillies. That, you know, the teams are saying, well, we know that this contract is going to age poorly. We're okay with that because if we win a World Series in the meantime, if we win a World Series, 2 World Series, while this guy is 31 years old and not 38, it's all worth it.
Yeah.
So that's a different approach that, you know, Mike Elias doesn't seem to be willing to to go into. I mean,
Well, it's the difference in philosophy. Mike
Yeah.
Elias wants sustained competitive success for a long period of time. He did not go out and say, I want to win a World Series. He went out and said, I want to be competitive, which is very, very different in my mind. So to me, the Phillies going out and signing Trey Turner, Bryce Harper, and all the other guys, knowing that, they are going to get older, they're probably going to get slower, they may get injured. But, in the meantime, they're going to be competing for World Series.
Yeah.
So to them, that risk and the money, it's worth it for the chance at getting a title.
Right. It's just a totally different approach in philosophy. But I do still think that this team, under David Rubenstein, I think a lot of fans can look at the comments yesterday and say, there's reason to believe that this team will get closer to 200 million, that this team will be able to extend one of their young stars. He didn't say there were no concerning real red flags about anything that he said.
No. And I mean, give credit where credit is due. Not so, I've covered baseball. This is my 6th season. And that was my first time speaking to an owner on a scrum like that. So bare minimum, but he did it, he stood there and he faced questions from the media.
I still think the most interesting thing that he said was that he's gone to Japan at least once a year, every year since 1970.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. I've never been to Japan once.
No. Well, we don't have a financial limit. So
we do have a financial limit. Let me tell you, it doesn't include my budget does not include going to Japan every year. So insightful conversation with David Rubenstein. There's so much yet to be learned about this team on the diamond. We have yet to see them in an actual Grapefruit League game. That doesn't happen until Saturday. Over the next coming days, if the full team is here, Danielle, is there one thing that you're really looking forward to seeing or to talking to players about before Grapefruit League games begin?
Well, I think to me the most interesting thing to watch all spring is this outfield competition and rotation competition. Because I think, you look at the rotation, it seems pretty set. But I do still think a guy like Cade Povich or Albert Suarez can, sneak their way onto this roster, whether as a starter or in the bullpen. In the outfield competition, the Orioles have so many outfielders right now.
Yeah.
And, Michael Elias said on the first day that Hudson Kirk said it's earned the right for Major League at-bats. So who else is going to be in the outfield?
Right.
Like, how many outfielders are they planning on having on his opening day roster? Because if he's on it, that's at least 4.
Yeah.
You're probably going to have a 5th,
Yeah.
There's just a lot of outfield options right now for this team.
Yeah, we heard from Elias on the first day where he said Jorge Mateo is probably not going to be on this opening day roster, probably not ready after he's undergoing Tommy John, which is not a distressing sign. That's just the natural time frame. When he comes back, as John Mioli pointed out in a previous show, he doesn't have the luxury, Jorge Mateo doesn't, of come back and be in a DH. He's got to come back and be an impact defender.
Yeah.
So they want to make sure that he's 100% defensively when he comes back. So one fewer infielder opens the door for one more outfielder.
Yeah, you could have 5 outfielders, but who's 5th right now?
I think right now the favorite would be Ramon Laureano. They signed him to that $4 million deal a few weeks ago, kind of a late ad right before camp. But you have Dylan Carlson, who's a switch hitter as well. I think the Orioles are probably looking at 5 guys in the outfield going into the season. But I'm also excited to see how some guys that we were talking about that were on the roster bubble, like Cade Povich, like Chase McDermott, I think on a position player side, Kobe Mayo, there's no seemingly spot for him right now on this big league roster. I'm excited to see if he goes out there and mashes this spring and says, you got to carry me somehow, or you got to call me up early in the season. Yeah.
And then the bullpen, I feel like a success story always sneaks his way onto this opening day bullpen. A guy who was just completely off everybody's radar. Excuse me. Yeah. There could be maybe like an Albert Suarez type story, a guy who's been out of the majors. Everybody loves those type of stories, and I feel like in the bullpen is where it's going to happen. Yeah. Well, we all have plenty more coverage on the BaltimoreBanner.com and on social media at @D_Allentuck on Twitter. And we have @AllBanner Sports videos coming at you daily, like the video we posted yesterday of Adley Rutschman crushing a home run off. The first time it was Grayson Rodriguez, the second time off Cade Povich. So he's batting from the other side of the plate. I think it was off Cade Povich. I think it was Albert Suarez. Was it Albert Suarez? Yeah, because he's batting from the left side of the plate. So why would he be facing Cade Povich? It's tough to keep track of. It's sunny. The days are long here in spring training, and we have so much more coverage coming your way. Please like, rate, review, subscribe. Write us a 5-star review on the Banner Baseball Show, and I will read it out here on the show. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Danielle Allentuck,